Does the ethical and sustainable investment community give the fashion industry a passing grade? Does the community believe global apparel brands should be responsible for wages paid to the workers who make their clothes? Is the fashion industry considered, or will it be considered, a stranded asset by many financial experts, not unlike the oil and coal industry is viewed today? Does the financial community believe that the fashion industry is worth saving? Welcome to Big Closet, Small Planet, made possible by the Lawless Foundation, the Relander Foundation, and Tencel. Big Closets is produced in collaboration with Ecotextile News. I'm Mike Schrager. A good deal of the information promoted within what I call often the sustainability business bubble comes from the apparel brands and the industry platforms that they are members of themselves. And the information they promote is about their leadership, their sustainability commitments, their accomplishments, their new innovations. But of course, naturally, these perspectives tend to focus on the positive and not necessarily on what is not working. So I wanted to hear from other stakeholders, and today in particular, the financial community, and specifically the ethical green side of the financial and investment community. If there's any sector that has the power and influence, it's the financial sector. So today I'm lucky enough to have Sasja Beslik on the line. Sasja is a pretty outspoken ethical financial expert who has spent the last number of years actively promoting ethical investment, sustainable investment, green investment. Your background is a story on Wikipedia is more compelling than I realized. So how did you end up in Sweden and such?
Yeah, it's a bit of a strange story. You would think that, but I managed to escape war in Bosnia. I didn't want to do military service, and I ended up fleeing the city where I grew up, and I spent months in park benches, bus stations, on the street before I found out that I could take the refugee buses at the time from Croatia to Poland. And when in Poland, I had no more money, so I had 200 Deutschmarks left, and I had to pay a ticket to a boat or ferry, and I took the ferry to Sweden, to Ystad at that time, and that was basically my entry into Sweden. This is back in 1993.
So did you imagine at that point that you would be working with finance and sustainability issues? Was that even on your agenda then?
No, at that time, the only thing on the agenda was to survive and sort of avoid any kind of military service, war in general. I left my parents back then, I don't have siblings, so I was alone. So it was I was more in a survival mode. Of course, the experiences during the war and what I've seen and experienced have, in many ways, framed the thinking and also some of my convictions that I'm using still today. When you experience the war, you see the the worst side of a human beings, and you see probably also the best sides, because you see how people are trying to resist to all that brutality, and you also see people who are doing things or committed to do things that are really not nice, and you see that duality of in human beings. And for me, the financial industry, economy, all of that is about people. It's people making decisions at the end. And I think that working with sustainable investments over the years, the more and more I look back, I think sort of my conclusions are very often ending at the fact that it's the behavior of the people, it's what we choose to do, and I sort of emphasize that what we choose to do, that makes a difference. Not making any choices, being neutral, saying that if I don't do it, somebody else will, and so on. So these are the things that have influenced pretty much the way how I see things, and also how I react in the way how I invest, or in the way how I see problems being solved, and so on. So it has a significant sort of impact on me as an individual. and the way how my actions are shaped.
I was thinking that someone who's faced war and potential death and has sort of taken themselves up by their bootstraps in the way that you have, do you feel you have a good radar for the bullshit factor, or is that something you think about a lot? What's real, what has real impact, and what doesn't?
Yeah, but yeah, to a certain extent, that puts you in a sort of a frequency where you would like, as a person and individual, and I think I'm not alone and on that, is being, experiencing the war and hardships, and there are many other hardships that people experience, that you sort of want to cut to the chase, and you want to talk about the real things. You want to see the real improvements. You want to see what is really going on, because you sort of get almost allergic towards all the, nice packaging and nice framing of things and so on. So it is almost like a, vaccine that you get against bullshit. And
Mm.
I think it's sort of a it is creating another pair of spectacles that you can use for the world we live in, and maybe focusing more on the real issues and real things.
Is there a reason you chose finance? Was there a particular conscious choice about that?
It was a moment. It's a particular choice. I was working in for a big oil company for a couple of years on social and environmental issues in former Soviet Union, in Georgia and Azerbaijan. And then I went to work on some projects in Nigeria as a sort of a social impact assessment expert. And that was the moment when I realized, in these interactions back in the days, this is the beginning of 2000, that the financial industry has probably the most muscle and the power, and is truly global, and has all the means to make the world a better place, depending on how it's used. So it was not epiphany in the terms of I woke up one morning, but it was a gradual process where I understood that it's actually on the end of the story. In the market economy we live in, the financial industry that calls the shots, and I still believe that's the case. And that's why I still work with what I work with, and that I still believe that it's possible to make this change. So it was a process, and sort of a clear insight that I then transformed into the work that I'm doing today.
So let me ask you a few yes, no, or maybe questions. All you have to do is answer yes, no, or maybe.
Okay.
Uh, do you think ethical, or what is called ESG investing or sustainability investing, has made a positive difference for the environment and people's lives since it sort of was established?
Maybe.
Does the fashion and apparel industry do relatively well in this framework?
No.
Should the apparel industry be considered a stranded asset like oil and coal, like I talked about in the beginning?
Yes.
Should global brands be held directly responsible for paying living wages to the workers who make their clothes?
Oh, yes.
Should leading brands and buyers stop sourcing from countries that do not meet strict sustainability requirements?
No.
Given both the positive and negative impacts created by the apparel and fashion industry, is it worth investing in?
Yes.
Okay, interesting. I wasn't expecting some of those answers. Okay, so let's start with the bigger picture, Sasha. Um, can you just give us a brief update on the way the finance sector is currently engaged with or addressing key sustainability challenges? Because a lot has happened in the last 10 years. So where do we stand now?
Where we stand now is that the financial industry has finally sort of stopped having a conflict within the industry if sustainability investing is here to stay. Is it just a trend, or is it something that really adds value? So I think the front line has been moved from, traditional versus sustainable investment. So we are fine with that. Sustainability has won, which is very good. And it means it's now integrated in the way how the financial industry is viewing corporates on the listed markets, but also on the private equity side. It's a lot of talk about how things can be done. There are a lot of ratings. There's a big movement in this area. which is very positive. There are many commitments made, and so on. However, on the ground, there is still a big challenge because, as you know or may not know, but the financial market is what is called the secondary market, and the real world is what is called primary market. So what I'm trying to say that is that on the secondary market there are these huge commitments and support to principles for responsible investments and banking and trillions and zillions of dollars committed to be invested in a sustainable way. In the same time, on the primary market on the ground, where the billions of people live and where their businesses are made, there are very marginal improvements done. So there is a disconnect between what financial industry is doing and also what's going on the ground. And the second element of this is the fact that the information provided to sustainable investment industry or financial industry in general on sustainability is generated by corporates themselves and is then transformed by middle hands, being that rating agencies, to financial industry to be scalable and gradually integrated into investment decision processes that we have. So bear in mind that the information provided to financial industry is not assured, it's not third party verified, and it's very often not even checked if it's correct. So you have almost like a bit of a matrix world, if you know what I mean.
So there's no third party actor that is assessing the quality and credibility of the information you get from the companies.
Correct. So to make it very simple, you can operate a company that is global. You have the CSR report. The auditors will audit that information is collected in a proper way, but they will not audit if information provided in CSR report is correct and quality assured. So yeah,
And that means that the uh, analysts, for instance yourself, have
yeah,
to decide if you dig deeper and try to find out if it's accurate or not.
yes. So there are different ways to Rome or different ways to sustainability El Dorado or whatever you want to call it. One way is to say, well, I trust what is in the reports and I will integrate this information in my investment processes and I will sell my clients sustainable products and everybody's happy. The other one is that you actually look at the underlying information and you try to analyze if information is correct, if it's assured, if it's actually telling you a story how good or bad this company is, and that demands resource, knowledge, experience, volume. You need to have people that are skilled to do that, and that's basically how. I mean, if you make analogy to another world, so you would say that some people are really developing electric cars and some people are just installing batteries and calling them electric cars. So it's that's sort of a that's the big difference.
So ESG, as I understand it, means environmental, social, and governance, right? That's what the term refers to.
Correct, yes.
And it is, maybe you can say, and you've alluded to this, the strengths and weaknesses of this framework.
Yeah, I mean, ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance, and it's like a definition of issues or rather topics that are then later on transformed into a number of indicators for each sector. So you would have a telecom industry that will have a particular governance issues related to licensing. And then you will have the oil industry, oil and gas industry, which will have a particular environmental issues that are relevant for them. So not all of these E, S, and G can be relevant for different sectors in a different way. And it's our job to identify where do they most make sense when we make investment decisions. So you will probably focus more on governance issues for telecom company than on environmental issues because their carbon or climate footprint is not that big. But you would certainly focus more on environmental issues in mining industry or heavy industries in general, because that is where the materiality of the risk and opportunity is as big.
Does ESG help you really assess a company's actual contribution to people and the planet, or is it more of a relative framework? if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I mean, it's a very good question. So it is a relative framework, and as I said before, initially, it is based on self-reporting information. In order to really make difference, the ESG can give you almost like a snapshot where a company is, and bear in mind that most of the information that financial industry is using is backwards looking. And what I mean by that is that the portfolio managers or financial analysts today will have access to information what company has done for a year ago or 2 years ago, but they will need to make investment decision which is forward looking, and that makes it a bit complex from the sort of information ratio perspective, because what you need is to be able to understand how company is going to manage climate risks or environmental challenges or labor issues in forward-looking framework. So what we have done and what I've been doing for the last 9 months is developing a tool which we just recently launched, that is forward-looking and looking at the way how companies will be able to reach Paris target agreement set on climate 2050. And I tell you that the picture is not that rosy.
Right. And I'm thinking when you describe this today, given what we know, for instance, about climate and global warming, we know that there's the focus on the 1.5-degree pathway as where we need to stay within. An ESG framework, would it say, okay, now given what we know, the companies who set a science based target and report back on that, they're a better ESG investment than someone who doesn't? Is it evolve like that where things get updated and standards get more rigorous?
There's a jungle of standards. There is a lot of space for interpretation. Since you have your pod, I can do some of a breaking news for you. I just did sort of a summary of all listed companies in Sweden.
Yeah.
And I did it actually for all Nordic markets, and I'm going to do it for a number of other markets. So if you look at the underlying commitments of all of the companies that you will have listed on a Swedish stock exchange, there are about 200 of them. Uh, the trajectory they are on, if you look at all of their commitments, all of their past performance, and sectoral sort of performance over time, the Stockholm Stock Exchange and all of these companies are on 3.5 degrees path. So this is something that I will bring to the Nordic countries very soon in form of both reports and social media things. But this gives you a bit of a feeling that even in the most developed markets like Nordic markets, there is a lot of room for improvement in this area.
Okay. This idea that should we trust, as a investor, should we trust ESG ratings or ESG
Yeah,
proposed
yeah.
companies? It feels like what you're saying. It's not so clear that we should.
No, I mean, may I ask you a question? Would you buy a house, let's say in Spain, for 500 million Swedish crowns without on the internet without seeing it?
Of course not.
Yes. So basically, what that tells you is that the asset management industry, financial industry, is buying assets, stocks, bonds in the companies based on what these companies tell them on internet.
Okay.
Uh, of course, I mean, there is no sort of a reason to doubt that most of the companies will do, trustworthy, credible presentation of what they do. I read like zillion CSR reports over the last 20 years. I've never read anything about anything that is related to risk that they have problems with something.
Mm,
Uh, just let me remind you a couple of things. So, Volkswagen had a Dieselgate. You can go
yep.
back and read their CSR reports before Dieselgate. Nothing is a problem. There is nothing negative in it. Telia Sonera in Sweden had a number of CSR reports not indicating any issues with the corruption in Uzbekistan. And and so on and so on and so on. So what I'm trying to say that is that information is relevant. Yes, it gives you a trend snapshot, but if you really want to understand, you need to do a digging. And digging takes time. It requires knowledge and it requires courage as well. Because sometimes, even financial industry, even if you have the knowledge and the courage, you will face a lot of uh, struggle internally to get your view, through. So it's not an easy thing, even if you want to do the right thing. And if you have all the arguments at hand, it may sort of not go your way.
Hmm. So it feels to me that the ESG world has a potentially big degree of greenwashing if you don't really are an expert.
Yeah,
Um,
it does. As all the ecological organic stuff you read on the bottles, and you have recently a lot of focus on impact and positive impact towards sustainable development goals and so on. But the funny thing about that is that the company will provide you with a brand on the products, calling it organic or calling it responsible and so on, which is very funny because if you what they're trying to tell you is that this particular product is maybe organic, but the entire business model or the entire range of products on the other side may be killing that positive thing in 2 minutes by being produced in a completely different way. So it's not easy for consumers, and it's not easy for people who don't understand the dynamics behind to really understand, and that is also what is the issue with making this transformation.
okay, let's move into the fashion industry. How would you overall evaluate the sustainability or ESG performance of the fashion and apparel industry? Would you give
Well,
it like a high rating? I don't think so, because you said at the beginning, a low. What criteria should we use? Give us a sense.
you're coming to my favorite subject. I mean, fast fashion is sort of my favorite subject, has been for a number of years. So, I think I was clear publicly, and I'm going to be clear now. Fast fashion is not sustainable business. It will never be sustainable business model because it has elements in it that are hardly, even possible to make sustainable if we're still going to call that model for fast fashion. So, from the perspective of sustainability, the fast fashion is the sector that is creating significant damage to the resources, use of resources, biodiversity, water issues, land use issues, and so on. And if we, go into the social sort of an angle of it, it's just a tremendous negative impact that this industry has for women, mostly in developing countries, millions of them, giving that it does not provide, it has no prospect of development. What I mean by that, once you're in that industry, you have big difficulties to leave it. You don't have a space to educate yourself. Usually, the mother will bring in the daughter will bring her daughter, and so on. So they never get out of this vicious circle. The industry is using, in many cases, economic growth and development as the argument, saying that it's better to have these women working for slavery wages than not doing anything. Of course, you can have that view, but my view is that that industry is significantly using the human resource in these countries in such a terrible and unsustainable way, and has been doing that for 40 years now. It's almost impossible to find anything positive with it.
So let's just start there. I would say a lot of argue that the textile industry has been an important part of helping lower income countries move from extreme poverty to, they say with Bangladesh, like middle income countries, and that the textile industry was and is a key stepping stone to that. They also argue that even if right there are low wages, that it empowers women to come out from the home and actually have more flexibility and more power in comparison to where they were in a unequal situation at home. And you don't believe any of that.
You know, I can ask you a question. So, When have you seen or read or listened to workers, these women, being interviewed and posted on H&M's or any other fast fashion? I don't want to point out the them particularly, but where you can actually, because we live in a modern world, so you can have a Zoom call with the people working in the factories, women, and ask them about their working conditions and how this helps them from the poverty. You will never be able to see that. And the reason for that is that we live in a separate world. So, this world of Bangladesh and Cambodia and Ethiopia and Turkey and many other places is a world behind the curtains. Of course, we know the conditions are not good, but from a Western consumer perspective, I like to have 13, 14 seasons of clothing provided to me that most of it I don't need. And from a point of view of developing these, I mean, I met hundreds of workers in different places around the world over the long period of time, asking that very question: is this really helping you to get out of the poverty? And in most of the cases, the answer to that question is that no, it doesn't. It just helped me to survive. And it's working for the supplier of a fast fashion in Bangladesh uh, may to some people think, yeah, but I'm moving from the countryside. But then when you work in a cities, you have to pay the rent, the food and living costs are higher. So it's sort of a zero end game for many of these people. So I wouldn't sort of go that direction and say it's per definition better. Of course, it creates dynamics in these markets, and I'm not saying it doesn't, but the way how it's conducted and done, and also if you look at the, just to give you an example, so the 13 hours, 7 days a week in Ethiopia gives you $18 a month. I don't know if that's sustainable. I don't know if these people can live on it. I used to, when I visit these places, I used to speak to the shop owners. I used to speak to the doctors, to religious leaders to understand. Shop owners will give me information about when during the months of work, he needs to give credit to the workers because they have no money. And it usually be between 7 to 10 days before the end of the month. Is it because they are ruthless with the way how they spend their money or send them back home? Or is it because they really don't have it? I don't know. I used to speak to the doctors in the local clinics in many places around the world about what is the most common sort of a reason for treatment: stress, fatigue, in many cases related to the long hours of work and no rest. Religious leaders, what do they tell me about, what people complain about? So I don't, if you look at if you zoom out and take talk about the bigger picture, you will see that this industry is, aside of creating, some kind of economic growth in a very, very narrow sense, is not actually leaving anything else in these countries, which for me, is probably one of the reasons why the model is not sustainable.
Okay. So I think we're going to talk about what it would need to look like for it to be sustainable, if at all, if it's possible. But let's not jump into that yet. Just to follow up before we move on, um, is there any way that by being active as an industry in countries like Bangladesh or India, that this industry can have a positive impact on that society or that place?
But look at yes, if it's done properly, but look at the situation in the countries. Let me take China, for example. So you would have this problem for 10 years, maybe a bit more in China, and then the working conditions and pressure from the government has increased the quality work for these people, which inherently increased the price of the workforce. And in that particular case, then the fast fashion industry should stay there, and because they truly believe that this is the right way of doing, because they have been part of creating this. But they don't. They move. They move to the markets where the labor conditions are worse, where the price of labor is low. So you see sort of how the industry actually, in a sense, does not want to create this, because as soon as it's created, they move somewhere else. So I don't know if that sort of a portrays the dynamics of how the industry works, or it portrays um, the business model they have, which is which gravitates around basically two things. One is the cheap labor, and the second is to have a very quick ability to adjust to the consumer trends on the leading markets they have. So that's the sort of a center of gravity, and they need to keep the low cost down, the labor cost down, because otherwise the margins they take and the business model they have will not work. So it is heavily tilted towards the cheap labor.
So let's think about maybe you can name some major apparel companies. Name a few and maybe give us your view on how sustainable they actually are.
You know, because I'm Swedish, and I'll start with H&M. Of course, H&M is not alone. On the fast fashion side, you have Inditex, you have Zara, you have, I'm talking about the sort of a mid-segment brands, Louis Vuitton, and I don't know, all the big sort of a brands. I've been in their factories as well. It's not necessarily always the better picture. In some cases, yes. In some cases, not. But if you look at the volumes, then we talk about two big brands, which is H&M and Inditex. They are the ones having the huge sort of volumes around the world. I haven't seen. I've seen a commitment they made to pay living wages a couple of years ago. They withdraw from that, which makes it a bit funny. For me,
Who are
the
we talking
living
about now?
H&M.
Okay.
Inditex has not made that commitment. They are actually in many cases not taking the same heat at H&M, because H&M has been very outspoken about their ambition, which is good that they are. You have to give it to them. On the other hand, if you look at the numbers and if you look at how it actually looks on the ground, I wouldn't say that many of these commitments are supported with what's really going on. So, just to make clear for people who may listen to this, basic incomes, basic wages are something else from a living wage. Living wage is calculated on what people actually need to survive. In many cases, discrepancy in many of these markets is quite significant. So paying basic wage and like a guaranteed wage to these people is women is not the same thing as paying them a living wage, and that's sort of the biggest. I think the biggest sort of a area of conflict between the truly sort of a sustainable investment um, people, or professionals, and the ones that think, okay, but this is a process, and sometimes this is used as an excuse to saying that, well, we cannot, the H&M cannot alone raise the living wages because that will, create the bad dynamics on the market, which is for me a bit of a joke, because I can say the same thing. Then I cannot make any sustainable investments because that will create a very big disturbance on the market, because we're gonna give um, better sort of investment opportunities to some companies, not to others. So I think
Let
the
me
big,
stop you there because
yeah,
I think we need to clarify for the audience. You attracted a lot of attention because you're based in Sweden that and because of H&M being a Swedish based company.
yeah,
Uh, you did a case study on how they could double salaries for workers and only raise the price of their garments. You said minimally.
yeah.
So can you explain your conclusion and do you still stand behind that analysis?
Of course I do, and I can explain what we did. We actually calculated how much the consumers will need to pay to be able to pay living wages in Bangladesh. There was one country. It was very specific. And by increasing the price of garment by 5 crowns, Swedish crowns, which is what, 5 cents in euro, uh, H&M will be able to transfer that amount and pay the living wages in Bangladesh. And we published this became a very big thing, and we published the methodology, and we asked for the input and comments, critics of methodology that we used to calculate it. We never got it back, and of course, we didn't get any particular comments except the comment that that's not the way how the industry works. So that was the sort of a story about that, and of course, I
Well,
mean,
and let me just say that you were mentioning this earlier, but even as I understand, the labor unions and such say that individual companies cannot raise wages for just their workers because it would have this detrimental effect on the whole industry because a factory has many different companies products in there. So it just doesn't work that way. They're saying this has to happen, but it has to happen on a sectoral level that everyone agrees to raise wages, so it
Yeah,
becomes a pre-competitive kind of
of course.
thing. Isn't that a good argument?
No, and I tell you why. It's not a good argument for the reason that, of course, labor unions will say that because they have the stake in the game. So if the individual company will bypass labor unions in many of these countries and start doing the sort of improvements which they can do if they want to, then, of course, the labor unions use their legitimacy and they use their role. Of course, the labor unions would like to control that. And of course, the labor unions would like to be involved in that. And of course, the labor unions in Cambodia have been involved in this, and they are to a certain degree. And I met many of them when I was in Cambodia, struggling with the corruption and other issues. So, I mean, that's not the argument that I buy for very much for the experience I have directly interacting with them in many places around the world. And I don't think it will create uh, any other dynamics than, if these people can be paid for what they actually worth in terms of the living wages, that will improve to a certain extent, not to all of extent, but to a certain extent, their day-to-day life. I mean, it's like who forbids H&M to pay them more? Is
Mhm.
it unions? Of course, but the unions wants to control. They want to be part of the game. They want to be. They want to have their stake, and that's the sort of a game that has been going on. And Cambodia is an example. You can take it. I mean, ILO has been involved. H&M has been there. Inditex, everybody, and have living wages been introduced? They've been paid over the last 10 years? The answer to that question is no.
Yep. Well, I can imagine when my colleagues in the industry hear this, they're going to be fuming because they're going to say, this is not right, Sasha. So, what I think we need to do is do a debate on this.
Yeah.
And let's come back to that because that would be interesting to definitely hear their viewpoints, both the unions and the brands themselves. But I'm glad to hear your view on it. I just wanted to come back to in shifting from H&M. These big brands, Nike, Levi's, LMVH, all these big guns out there,
Yeah.
Adidas. Are you saying, none of them are really much better than each other? If you look at it from a impact point of view, it's just sort of a relative improvement, or what's your view? Is there anyone a shining star there?
Yeah, you have companies like Patagonia, which is the clothing producing company that has completely different approach, and is gaining traction for the way how they operate, and also the way what the philosophy is. And I think all of these brands that you're mentioning, I mean, Adidas, Nike, Louis Vuitton, whoever they are pretty much. I mean, if you look at it from a sectoral perspective, where I sit, H&M stands out as the best. So then tells you how the rest looks like.
But isn't there a deeper problem here that maybe your work in ESG is not really addressing, right? Because even Patagonia, oh, it is as I understand, a registered B corporation. I don't know what their growth targets are, but they are tend to grow, right? They have more and more market share. They're still relatively small compared to maybe the biggest actors, but they're not a closed loop circular business yet. They are growing. Isn't the issue about consumption and growth? Isn't that a more fundamental issue to not just our industry but overall?
I think it's a very relevant question. It's actually one of the questions that need to be answered in relation to sustainability in general. I think that the stable, responsible growth, if we call it, I cannot call it sustainable because that's something else. But stable and responsible growth is possible. I think companies definitely can grow, but I think the margins and the pace of this growth will probably look different, in 10 years than it is now. For that very reason that you're mentioning, it's overconsumption and unnecessary sort of a things that we are doing because the reality we live in is framed and shaped in a way that we are never sort of a good enough, and we are sort of eating that lie every day. And I think it's so many different levels. It's behavior level, it's economical level, it's technical things from a technical perspective, how the growth reflects what's the true development and not. So yes, I think the growth is needed and we need to grow. But it's how we grow that's a big question. Do we need to grow with the margins which are double digit every year, or can we do it in a more uh, stable way, which is more sort of a is I think I did a piece it's some time ago on what is a sustainable growth number per year for the world, and I don't recall, but I think it was around 3%. So that's the number. Sort of, it could be interesting. Uh, would that be enough? Of course, maybe not, maybe five. But if you look at the margins these companies have and what the shareholders are getting, and shareholders are sitting in the same planet as we, all of us, are sitting. At some stage, what are we going to do? They're going to, like Elon Musk, buy a ticket to Mars or build a bunker in Nevada desert. I mean, I don't know exactly what's the plan, but shareholders are also people or organizations. So it is a
But
very
you also said you said 3% growth. But as you said, what's more important, isn't it, is not the sort of number, but how that growth happens, right? Or
yes,
how that
yes.
development happens.
Yeah.
Because if it grows in the wrong direction, it doesn't help if it's three or six or one.
Yeah, but I mean, you've seen it during this COVID thing. I mean, we managed, due to the world shutdown of the economy, we decreased our emissions to the level that we need to do every year. So that sort of it tells you we shut down the world and we decreased the emissions for a number of months to a level that it needs to be in us to reach Paris climate agreement targets. So that gives an indication of the growth that we have today. The growth models we have today are not sustainable. I'm not saying that growth is not good. On the contrary, it's good, but it's how it's done. That is the next question for the young people that may take over this world, and they will think about that.
Right. Although we don't have much time for them to do that. If you believe what the scientists are saying. And let me just build on that. Isn't it? Wouldn't a sort of a really um, credible ESG or sustainability finance model say that companies that get the top rankings or companies that even make the cut should have science-based targets, should have living wage targets, should report back,
Yeah.
should have circular targets? I mean, shouldn't we be assessing companies in a whole new ambitious model than what they're assessed now?
Yes, and this is what it's called beyond the ESG. So it's more of the I call it like a true value investments. What is that you're having a far more, on one hand, detailed understanding of the business, understanding of where they are on the circular journey, where they are on the emissions journey, and so on, and then trying to identify the true value of the company from much longer perspective. Bear in mind that whoever sells you sustainable investment product and is telling you that this is evaluated on an annual basis is probably selling you bullshit, because sustainable investment products on the financial markets can give you some kind of a tangible outcome, maybe between 3 to 5 years. So if the portfolio manager is evaluated in 1 year to get his or her bonus, they will maximize the financial output of the product for their own personal and company gain. So sustainability will be probably relevant from the cosmetics perspective and not truly, because it needs sustainability aspect. They need time, much more time, to give you a result than the traditional sort of financial things, which are just numbers. So
Yep. Okay.
that's also one of the reasons why I think the more knowledge on the markets is needed for people to actually evaluate this, because they need to start asking themselves the question. If I buy an organic shirt from H&M, what is actually that I really get? And they need to ask themselves the same question when they buy a sustainable or ethical fund. What do I actually get? Do I get any tangibles in this? Uh,
Hmm.
so
And I
so
heard that's also the case with bonds that are now being called green, right? How do you define? There needs to be a standard of what is green and not, and they're probably relative. Is that right?
if you ask me, I mean, green bonds is one financial instrument that is used to emit bonds for the companies that need financing. Proceeds are used for particular sort of a green activities. So you will have companies that, in one part of the business could be issuing green bonds. In other part of business, they could do something else. And for me, the green bonds, it's just a financial instrument. Does it make any tangible difference? Truly, I don't think so. It can if it's done on a scale. So green bonds represent maybe 2% of the whole bonds issued on the market today. Will they grow? Maybe. The question is, for me, the all bonds should be green. I mean, all bonds should be
Right.
issued from that perspective. So it's just a financial engineering.
Right, and that relates to this whole idea that we can't have these special funds that are ESG or sustainability if the rest of the majority of funds are not. That's not going to get us there.
Yeah, but that's
Um,
that's exactly. I mean, that's the work that I'm doing right now. I mean, I joined for a year and some months ago, and what I'm doing here is transforming basically entire business model, all of the products into. I would not call them sustainable, but where the approach of analyzing companies is fully integrated in investment decisions.
okay,
That's what we need to do.
right. So let me finish up with two additional questions. Um, what could or would an apparel company or industry need to do for you to consider them a sort of good ethical investment or sustainability investment?
I mean, the first thing is, of course, to showcase the pilot showcase. They could take a market, or they could take the section of the market, or they could take five suppliers and change the business model how they deal with them. They could pay them, living wages. They could account for water usage they use and resource usage they use locally. I mean, have you ever been to Dhaka in Bangladesh?
I have not been to Dhaka yet. No.
No. But when you visit once, pay attention to the, tremendous lack of infrastructure. And how come that companies like H&M and many others operating, buying suppliers are not developing any local infrastructure in these countries? It's not their job. Of course, it's not their job. Do they pay taxes in these countries? I'm not so sure about that. So these are the sort of things. If they're going to do it properly, they could showcase in one country, in one region, or one segment of their supply chain. Okay, this is it's like a laboratory, like a test. So they can do it for 3 years and then test their business model towards the true sustainable business model. They can compare the margins and they can compare the lessons learned. And you could actually then, as a consumer, be sure that when you buy from these pilot testing areas, you're buying products that will certainly be more expensive, but you know actually what you're contributing to. So we need to be very pragmatic. This is not about policies, this is not about reports, this is about making things really work for people that are affected by this. Uh,
Okay.
yeah.
And so I guess if they were working, what about on the environment side? If they were working with new circular business models like rental and stuff as a means to find another way of dealing with the consumption issue, or new production technology or new materials or traceability, are
all
those, I mean, they're all good
Yeah, I mean, all of
relative to
these
what they
things
are
are
now.
really, yeah, yeah, all of these things. I mean, you can take Walmart. I mean, Walmart has cut their sort of energy on supply chain, energy efficiency. They've increased energy efficiency by 60% by pushing on suppliers a number of, energy improvements, including the solar panels and many other things, while keeping the margins down or pushing the cost on these suppliers. So, I mean, there is a variety of options that the big, mega businesses in the world, including, fast fashion industry can do uh, to improve it on the environmental side, many of these things. But bear in mind that in countries like in Bangladesh, parts of India, Ethiopia, most of these people don't even have access to electricity. So, I mean, it is what it is. But I think the role of the businesses, big businesses in these countries, need to be much more progressive from the angle of providing the true sustainability solution that it is today.
So if you were to see a company who was engaging at the industry or systems level, right,
Yeah.
where they're helping the larger country address their social welfare system,
Yeah,
right? And they're acting both on the energy side, for instance, and on the social welfare side
yeah,
then you would say this is a company actually who's using its power to be more of a broader social enterprise, not just a profit maximization kind of
exactly.
model. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. And imagine the world where, we know that all of these fast fashion industry companies have been operating in Southeast Asia for, I don't know, last 25 years. Imagine if they would have created, like 20 years ago, a fund where they put part of the margins they have or income they have on an annual basis, and that fund is then used for investment in improvement for schools, infrastructure, energy, all of these things. I mean, this is not a rocket science. This is doable.
Hmm.
But actually, the way how they approach this when you talk to them is that they have no business in these countries. They have just suppliers there. That's it. They
Hmm.
don't see the ownership. They don't feel the ownership because the model is great. Because if they don't like it, they move somewhere else. So it is also the role they play in the long term.
Yeah, I would argue they don't say that always, actually. It depends maybe who you're talking to in the company. Obviously, the sustainability people are super passionate about using the business to improve people's lives, and
Yeah,
often the leaders are, but they have these competing everybody has these very strong competing incentives, and always I would argue the financial short-term incentives usually win out, don't they? They're just more powerful. That's what you're getting real
yeah,
rewards to do. So they're almost one could argue fighting a very difficult battle, an uphill battle, until the incentive system, and here I'm thinking about tax systems and everything, really make it profitable to invest in the right things and not invest in the wrong things.
yeah. But then
Today,
you
one
need
could
to have
argue
a
those exist. Those don't exist today, do they?
correct. But then you need to have, what is the I call it the true price of a jersey sold in a store in Stockholm or London or New York. What is the true price of it in terms of the true price for the water consumption, transport, CO2 emissions, cotton fields, working conditions? What is the true price of that? We don't know
Right.
because the externalities of the economic model we have are not priced in, and we go back to the sort of a core and market economy, capitalism, uh, pricing externalities will make many business models stranded tomorrow. Um,
Right.
and
Right.
yeah,
Yep. And so that's a little bit about should we be taxing consumption, and should this taxing resources is not labor. One of our podcasts was about that.
yeah,
That would drive entrepreneurship innovation towards models that are actually more likely to be sustainable than the ones that we have today. Some would argue, and that's what I'm also thinking. In this industry, we of course have innovations, models that are startups that some of these big companies are buying or investing in
yeah,
that maybe have the potential to be quite different, but they're still being held up or supported by the existing models or the
exactly,
existing companies. Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
So
So can the fashion industry exist in a world? I mean, people will need clothes, but they may not need them this way. Is there a world where you see an industry that exists in a climate neutral or climate positive world where there's living wages? Can the fashion industry sort of exist in this world? Is there a role for it?
yeah, oh yes, oh yes. I mean the the sort of the mental fabric of market economy capitalism is gravitates around individual satisfaction and the vanity and many other things. So I think that, and we are all sort of hooked on the drug. So I think it will continue existing. It will continue, maybe not growing to the same extent now physically in the shops, but digitally, which also puts you into the question of how much do these servers that you buy H&M or you buy Adidas or Nike or anything else online, how much electricity and CO2 emissions are they related to, which is another question. So I think I think the fast fashion industry will continue to be present as long as we don't answer some of the fundamental questions related to growth in our societies in general. And also, what is the actually objective? What do we want? All of us want to be happy and healthy and live a long life and so on. So I think it's a part of it's a bigger philosophical discussion that we usually don't have. And economy is not a science from a perspective of being science. It's a grouping of a lot of social um, interactions. It reflects the societal social interactions at so many different levels. So it's not only about the growth, it's about development, it's about inclusion, it's about creativity, it's many other things. So I mean, the question you're posing, it's a big one. And it's not only on fast fashion, it's related to many other industries. And it's sort of a start. I said that initially when you asked me the question about what sort of made me do what I do. It's all about us. It starts with people and it ends with people. And I think that's the sort of for me, one of the sort of answers or closing on this. We need to change the way how we view, our own development, our own sort of a purpose, our own objectives, and to see other people, as us, because they are not suppliers. These women that I met in these factories, they are not Bangladeshi women. They are people just like me. They have their own dreams. They have their own hopes. We need to find a place for them.
Sasha, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thanks a lot.